The Black Planet. In the quiet town of Willow Creek, where the stars twinkled like forgotten Christmas lights, there lived a peculiar old man named Walter. Every evening, Walter would sit on his porch, sipping tea from a chipped mug, his eyes never straying from the sky. His neighbors, who often whispered about his strange habits, knew him as the town's unofficial astronomer, a title he wore with pride despite their skepticism. His eyes, though old and wrinkled, had a youthful sparkle that hinted at secrets only the cosmos could share. One fateful night, Walter's gaze was drawn to a new speck in the sky, a spot of blackness that seemed to be growing ever closer. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he realized what was happening. He had read about rogue planets in his dusty science journals, but to witness one firsthand was a revelation that filled him with both awe and dread. He knew he had to act fast. Walter bolted into his cluttered study, the floorboards groaning under the weight of his urgency. He grabbed his old radio and dialed the frequency for the local emergency broadcast system. His trembling voice crackled over the airwaves. "Attention, citizens of Willow Creek. There is a rogue planet approaching Earth, and we must prepare for the worst." The silence on the other end was deafening. He knew his message was either too strange to be believed or too terrifying to be acknowledged. The following day saw Walter's quiet warnings gain momentum as the black planet grew larger in the sky. It loomed over them like a silent sentinel, casting a shadow that seemed to suck the color from the world. The townsfolk started to gather around his house, seeking answers and solace in his calm yet concerned demeanor. The local authorities, initially dismissive, now turned to him for guidance. As the planet drew closer, scientists and professors from around the globe converged on Willow Creek. They set up makeshift observatories, their faces a mix of fascination and horror as they studied the approaching celestial body. The news reports grew more frequent and alarming, fueling a frenzy of panic and speculation. Governments scrambled to formulate a response, but the sheer unprecedented nature of the event left them at a loss. The question on everyone's lips grew louder and more insistent. What will it do? Experts in black suits and stern expressions held press conferences, their voices tight with tension. They spoke in hushed tones about gravitational anomalies and potential doomsday scenarios. The world held its breath, waiting for the reassurance that never came. Instead, they offered a grim consensus. The rogue planet's path would indeed intersect with Earth's, and the consequences were likely to be catastrophic. The planet's magnetic field was already wreaking havoc with the planet's weather, causing bizarre phenomena that sent people scurrying into their homes and glued to their screens. Walter, now the town's reluctant prophet, found himself at the center of an international media storm. His porch, once a bastion of solitary contemplation, was now a bustling hub of reporters jostling for his insights. He spoke calmly and knowledgeably, his voice a beacon of reason in a sea of chaos. Yet even he couldn't quell the rising tide of fear. The townsfolk looked to him for hope, but his gaze remained fixed on the sky, his heart heavy with the burden of his discovery. The day the moon transformed into a crimson disk, the world took notice. The phenomenon known as the blood moon had occurred before, but this time it felt ominous. The planet's approach had disrupted Earth's magnetic field, and the result was a breathtaking yet terrifying spectacle. Lightning danced across the urban landscapes, painting the night with electric strokes of white. The air was charged with an energy that crackled along the skin, and the winds picked up, whipping through the streets like the breath of a giant, angry beast. Walter, now a local hero and a beacon of hope amidst the chaos, remained unflappable. He knew that the red moon was only the beginning of what was to come. He gathered the townsfolk in the community center, his voice steady as he outlined the gravity of the situation. The planet, now twice the size of Jupiter, had begun to exert its gravitational pull, and the effects were only going to intensify. "We must prepare," he urged, his words echoing through the hushed room. "The time for skepticism is over. We face a challenge that we have never encountered before, but together we can find a way to survive." On the night of March 9th, at precisely 1 a.m., the moon bled a fiery crimson, casting an eerie glow over Willow Creek. The townsfolk stared in awe, their whispers hushed by the spectacle. The lightning that streaked through the clouds above the city's skyline was a stark contrast to the serene silence that had enveloped the streets. The winds grew stronger, whipping through the town with a ferocity that seemed to carry whispers of the impending doom from the heavens. Trees bent and groaned, their leaves rustling a mournful lullaby. The blood moon was more than just a cosmic event. It was a harbinger of the unthinkable. The world's most sophisticated telescopes captured the black planet as it loomed ever larger, its presence a dark stain against the fabric of space. The news reports grew frantic, and the scientific community was ablaze with theories and warnings. The planet's gravity was beginning to tug at the Earth, and the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. As the hours ticked by, the once predictable tides grew erratic, pulling away from the shorelines only to rush back with a fury that claimed lives and reshaped continents. The magnetic poles began to shift, causing compasses to spin wildly and GPS systems to fail. Birds, unable to navigate the altered skies, fell from the heavens in droves. The auroras grew brighter and more menacing, painting the skies in an apocalyptic palette of reds and greens. And then, amidst the chaos, came the floating cruise liner. The colossal ship hovered above the city like a mirage, a silent testament to the unprecedented power of the approaching planet. A collective gasp echoed through the streets as the gravity-defying sight sent waves of terror crashing through the panic-stricken populace. The man's cry grew into a chorus of horror as more and more people caught sight of the impossibility above. The cruise liner's lights flickered eerily, a ghost ship adrift in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced in the wind. Panic gripped the city as the laws of physics seemed to unravel before their very eyes. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a rhythmic pulse that matched the erratic beat of their racing hearts. The gravity waves emanating from the rogue planet were wreaking havoc, lifting cars into the air, toppling buildings as if they were made of matchsticks. The screams of those trapped in the maelstrom of panic were a cacophony that drowned out the distant wails of emergency sirens. In the midst of this chaos, Walter's radio crackled to life with the voice of the Prime Minister, desperation tinging his words. "We need a solution, gentlemen. This is not just a natural disaster. It's an extraterrestrial threat of unprecedented magnitude." The room fell silent as the gravity of his words settled over them like a heavy shroud. The officials exchanged worried glances, their brows furrowed with the weight of the decision they were about to make. The first photos of the black planet began to circulate on the internet, sending the global community into a frenzy. The image was stark. A monolithic sphere of darkness, twice the size of Jupiter, with a swirling maelstrom of clouds that looked like a gaping maw ready to consume the Earth. The internet buzzed with speculation and fear. Conspiracy theories bloomed like toxic mushrooms in the damp underbelly of the web, each more outlandish than the last. Yet, amidst the madness, there was an undeniable truth. The planet was real, and it was coming for them. Walter's predictions grew more dire with each passing day. The moon, once a constant companion, now drifted further from Earth's grasp, its orbit distorted by the alien gravitational pull. The tides grew erratic, swamping coastal cities and retreating to expose vast stretches of ocean floor. Pluto, once the solar system's lonely sentinel, was no more than a memory, obliterated by the planet's unfathomable mass. The news of its destruction sent shockwaves through the scientific community, and the reality of their situation hit home with the finality of a tombstone. In the hallowed halls of power, heads of state huddled together, their faces etched with lines of fear and determination. One of them stood, pounding the podium with a trembling fist. "Gentlemen," he bellowed, his voice thick with urgency, "we can no longer sit idly by. The time for investigation is upon us. We must send our most advanced spaceships to this black planet to gauge its intentions, to seek any hope of survival." The room fell silent, the gravity of his words hanging in the air like the shadow of the planet itself. The world's governments pooled their resources, launching an unprecedented joint mission. Space stations around the globe dispatched their finest pilots and most sophisticated vessels into the abyss, their trajectories aimed at the ever-expanding point of darkness in the sky. The spaceships, sleek and gleaming, shot through the atmosphere like arrows, their engines roaring a defiant challenge to the cosmic intruder. The people of Earth watched in awe and trepidation, their hearts swelling with both hope and dread. For the astronauts aboard the spaceships, the journey was one of stark contrasts. They marveled at the beauty of their planet from afar, the swirling blues and greens a stark counterpoint to the looming blackness ahead. Yet as they grew closer to the rogue planet, their wonder gave way to horror. The magnetic fields surrounding the planet were so intense that their instruments went haywire, and their ships groaned and creaked in protest. The once clear channels of communication with Earth were now a garbled mess of static and fear. The moment the first ship disappeared into the planet's shadow, the tension in the cabin grew palpable. The second ship, now the vanguard of humanity's desperate quest for answers, approached with a mix of awe and trepidation. The astronauts, seasoned explorers all, had never seen anything like it. The planet's gravity began to tug at their vessel, pulling them inexorably closer. "We're losing control," one of them shouted into the radio, his voice crackling with the strain of their situation. Back on Earth, the silence was deafening. Ground control held their collective breath, watching the screens that had gone eerily quiet. The world waited with bated breath for news from the edge of oblivion. Then a faint signal pierced the void. "We're in the gravitational field." The pilot's voice was tight with fear. "We can't break away." The line went dead, leaving only the echo of their desperation. The remaining astronauts aboard the second spaceship stared at the monolithic blackness of the planet, their eyes wide with terror and amazement. They had come to understand the true nature of the beast they faced. The instruments beeped and whirred in a cacophony of panic as the ship was drawn closer. The planet's magnetic pull was like a vice, squeezing the very air from their lungs. "We have to get out of here," one of them managed, his voice barely above a whisper. On Earth, the news of the astronauts' fate spread like wildfire. Panic and chaos ensued as governments scrambled to enact emergency protocols. The elite and privileged few were whisked away to underground bunkers, while the masses were left to fend for themselves. Cities erupted in riots as desperate citizens clashed with security forces. Their anger and fear, a volatile cocktail that set the world alight. The once orderly streets of Willow Creek were now a battleground of survival, with fires licking the sky and looters ransacking stores. The weather had turned apocalyptic. Monstrous floods swept through coastal cities, turning boulevards into raging rivers and swallowing buildings whole. Tornadoes danced across the landscapes, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. The heavy rainfall, once a gentle whisper against the window panes, now hammered down like the fists of an angry god. The skies, once a canvas of tranquil blues and fluffy whites, had been transformed into a tumultuous cauldron of black and grey, churning with malevolent intent. The spaceships, so full of hope and promise, now found themselves in the clutches of the very monster they sought to understand. Ground control's warnings had come too late. The first craft had been obliterated by a sudden burst of light, the intensity of which was beyond the comprehension of the human eye. The second ship, caught in the planet's gravitational embrace, had no choice but to continue onward, their fate tied to the whims of the cosmos. In the cramped cabin, the remaining astronauts held on to the last shreds of their sanity, their eyes glued to the screens showing the planet's unfathomable vastness. They were pilgrims on a doomed voyage, their spaceship a tiny mote in the shadow of the Colossus that loomed ever closer. The radio crackled to life again. "We've lost visual of the first ship," the controller's voice tight with tension. "Proceed with caution, but don't let it out of your sight." The second spaceship shuddered as it approached the planet, the gravity tugging at it like the hand of a giant. The astronauts, faces pale and drawn, exchanged glances that spoke volumes of their fear. They had seen the first ship vanish in a silent explosion of light, a cosmic sneeze that had erased their colleagues from existence. They knew they were next. The radio crackled again, a ground control's voice filled with urgency. "Astronauts, retreat immediately. We're picking up anomalies in the planet's magnetic field. It could be hostile." But the astronauts were too close now, the planet's gravity an invisible force that had them in its thrall. The ship's captain, a veteran of many missions, gripped the controls with white-knuckled determination. "We can't go back," he murmured, his voice thick with dread. "We're going in." The second spaceship plunged into the shadow of the black planet, and the world held its breath. The screens flickered with interference, the only light coming from the eerie glow of the instruments. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of white lightning streaked across the view screen, and the ship's alarms blazed to life. The astronauts were thrown against their restraints as the vessel shuddered violently. The captain's voice was a scream of terror that was cut short by a deafening explosion. The ship disintegrated into a cloud of debris, scattered like confetti in the cold vacuum of space. The last spaceship, now the solitary sentinel of humanity's hope, radioed back to Earth. The voice of its captain was strained, his words barely intelligible through the static. "We're in trouble," he shouted. The magnetic field is growing stronger, and we can't break free of the gravity. The ground control's frantic commands were met with silence. The astronauts aboard watched in horror as their sister ship disappeared in a burst of light. The gravity was relentless, pulling them closer to the planet's inky surface. The ship's instruments, once a bastion of precision, were now a cacophony of beeps and alarms, their readings fluctuating wildly. The astronauts could feel the magnetic pull tugging at their very bones, a deep, unyielding force that seemed to resonate with something primal within them. The captain's voice grew softer. "We're being drawn in. We can't hold much longer." The radio hissed and crackled, the line to Earth fading in and out like a dying heartbeat. And then silence. The void of space swallowed their cries, leaving only the echo of their own breathing to keep them company. The planet grew larger in their viewport, its surface a canvas of darkness that seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. The townsfolk of Willow Creek, huddled around their screens, watched in horror as the final beacon of their hope was extinguished. The black planet had claimed another victim, leaving only despair in its wake.